From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South. I am Doris Polo. A large crowd of demonstrators gathered near Chile's presidential palace on Monday, just hours after President Sebastián Piñera reshuffled his cabinet. The protesters were again met with repression, even though the state of emergency was lifted at the start of Monday. Police set up a security perimeter around the palace and fired tear gas into crowds trapped in narrow streets. A number of people have been injured. Mobilizations against the government and decades of neoliberalism have been ongoing for over a week as citizens call for the creation of a new constitution. A general strike has also been called for Wednesday, with people organizing to paralyze all activities and to march across the country. A United Nations special mission that was set to arrive on Monday in Chile to assess alleged human rights violations has announced their arrival has been delayed. On Monday afternoon, the National Institute of Human Rights reported that the delegation would arrive later in the week. 3 human rights experts are being sent to examine complaints of human rights violations, interview victims, and gather information on the events that have transpired. The Vice President of the Chilean Doctors Association, Patricio Mesa, has said that the number of people with eye injuries as a consequence of violent repression of demonstrations is disproportionately high in Chile when compared to other countries seeing protests with similar characteristics around the world.
What we understand is that there are a great number of people who have been injured. The former health minister acknowledged 3 days ago that there have been more than 3,500 people injured. Our records show the number of people that have been subject to serious ophthalmic damage to an eye is more than 130. We've seen that every day we have around 12 new patients with severe damage to an eye. What worries us when we look at the statistics is that in other countries where there have been protests with similar characteristics to those here in Chile, there have been significantly fewer patients with these kinds of eye injuries. The number of cases we've had in Chile is much greater than in other international situations. That's why we're certain that the correct protocol for the use of non-lethal weapons isn't being followed to maintain public order. So we're calling for their use to be suspended until the public can be assured that the correct protocols are being followed to protect, for one, protesters, but also the institutions that use these weapons.
In an effort to demobilize the demonstrations, President Sebastián Piñera has reshuffled his cabinet. But most Chileans remain skeptical about Piñera's new ministers, saying they are more of the same.
You can see it on the streets. There is no possibility of this fading. It was mere makeup. We bring, as I said, the people of Chile are betting on a constituent assembly and a new constitution made for all Chileans.
The new cabinet ministers are more of the same. They are the same as them. They leave through one door and come back through the other. The problem here is the economic model. That is the big problem we have. Those who are in now and those who were sacked, those who left, are the defenders of the system.
Now, President Piñera's cabinet reshuffle saw the Interior Minister Andrés Chadwick replaced. He has been the target of criticism due to the highly repressive actions of the security forces. The Minister of the Economy was also replaced, but most of the 8 ministerial changes were swaps among existing members of the cabinet. Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro condemned the crisis in Chile and expressed solidarity with the people, saying they are the victims of heavy repression by authorities.
Fíjense ustedes lo que está pasando en Chile.
Look at what's happening in Chile. You see the collapse of the neoliberal system. The neoliberal state model has Noam Chomsky says, after 40 years of savage neoliberalism, now we see the people have an insurrection. The Chilean people have no right to public education. Boys and girls have no right to public education. And everything is privatized. Everything. It's impossible for a young kid from an ordinary family to go to school. They're not entitled to public health, to social benefits, to a dignified retirement, and many other things because that's the capitalist model.
He's not entitled to public health.
The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights is holding meetings with various social sectors in Ecuador to conduct a post-mortem on the violence that took place during the 11-day national strike. The demonstrations were sparked by President Lenin Moreno's economic measures. Our correspondent has more.
Una comisión de la CIDH ha llegado a Ecuador.
Representatives from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, or IACHR, have arrived in Ecuador to assess the violations that occurred during the nationwide strike. The Commission has already met with several government authorities and will meet with the National Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities, CONAIE, and people who took part in the strike. Ecuador's ombudsman also met with the IACHR, noting the importance of evaluating the cases of human rights violations. He further pointed out that police repression is a human rights violation. Meanwhile, the CONAIE has called for a public meeting with people who were attacked during the strike. While here, the IACHR will meet with various social organizations, and a report is expected to be published on the deaths, injuries, and incarceration of hundreds that occurred during the protest.
That was Denise Herrera with that report. Coming up, miners have marched in Bolivia in support of the recently re-elected president, Evo Morales. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Bolivian miners marched in the capital, La Paz, to show their support for President Evo Morales. Miners from the Huanuni Mine Workers Union marched down the city's central El Prado Avenue. Some even detonated small sticks of dynamite to celebrate Morales' victory. They said the opposition, along with several media outlets, are trying to delegitimize the election result, even though it was declared by Bolivia's Supreme Electoral Court.
Como siempre, hermanas y hermanos.
As always, we won in the first round of elections, and that showed the spirit of the Bolivian people. This morning, Brother Alvarado reported the latest data from the 340 municipalities in Bolivia, showing that we won in almost 300 of them. We won the elections in 85% of municipalities. We have a majority in the Senate, a majority in the lower house. We won in all 5 of the special indigenous movement regions, 100%. That's the force, that's the unity, that's the commitment of the Bolivian people to our process of change.
Thousands of workers marched in Haiti to demand the resignation of President Jovenel Moïse. Textile workers took to the streets calling for the president to step down. They also demand that their salaries be tripled. Currently, the workers' wages are around $130 a month. Demonstrations are continuing to intensify in the Caribbean country as living standards, working conditions, and labor rights continue to slide under the rule of U.S.-backed President Moïse. Now, while an anti-government march took place, 2 people were killed as several hundred police demonstrated for better salaries on Sunday. The first victim was shot during the protest demanding that President Jovenel Moïse step down. The gunman who reportedly shot that unidentified person was then beaten to death and set on fire in the streets. Many looked on in horror as the body burnt. Several police fired a volley of gunshots and tear gas into the crowd of anti-government protesters.
See what they did to us? After the killing, here's the result. You cannot shoot more than the Cité Soleil militants.
Marine life and local businesses are facing the effects of an oil spill in northeast Brazil. Large quantities of oil have washed ashore as efforts are made by the government and volunteers to clean up the sludge. Officials say attempts to keep the oil from reaching the shore have been ineffective. The 2-month struggle has affected the fishing industry and life for many. Authorities have seized a ton of cocaine destined for Belgium in the Costa Rican port city of Limón. According to the security minister, the contraband was found in a shipping container at a terminal operated by a private company. The minister said the terminal was searched after the Coast Guard received intelligence about drugs in one of the containers.
The anti-narcotics police, under their inspection duties, found various bags in a container with the final destination of Belgium. 954 kilos of cocaine hydrochloride were found.
In other news, a new wave of protests in Honduras has led to heavy military repression. Protesters are still on the streets as new allegations have surfaced linking the country's president to organized crime.
President Juan Orlando Hernandez has denied these allegations and has vowed to clear his name. He says he intends to do so with the support of his party and public workers.
Criminals who appeared as witnesses showed how easy it is to lie with immunity. They tried to deny the anti-crime strategies developed by the state.
While President Hernandez has had the support of the armed forces, the people have vowed to keep up protest action until he resigns. There have been calls for greater mobilizations as the people demand that their voices are heard.
He has to go because he's a drug trafficking dictator. He's a criminal. It's 100% proven that they stole the election.
We are under a dictatorial regime and under the rule of a drug dealer. It's a shame for Honduras.
He's a thief, and he has condemned 70% of the population to live in poverty.
The situation in Honduras is worsening. Other public officials have also been accused of crimes, and they've also threatened violence. But the people remain resilient in their struggle.
At this moment, across Latin America, we have people mobilizing, and this is a sign of the class struggle in the continent, and it's strengthening.
In his refusal to leave office, Juan Orlando Hernandez is backed by the high commanders of the police and the military, who have used force against protesters and violated human rights.
We will continue fighting because it's our obligation. Our struggle is for the people and their independence. We are not mistaken. We are not only asking for the drug trafficker dictator to leave, but for the end of the neoliberal model, which is negatively affecting everyone.
Security near the Honduran government's headquarters was tightened since the president's brother, Juan Antonio Tony Hernandez, was found guilty in a vast drug conspiracy case in the U.S. The president has instructed the armed forces to impose order and repress any mobilization that comes close to that area.
A curfew did nothing to stop anti-government demonstrations in Iraq. We'll have details after this. Welcome back. In Iraq, anti-government demonstrations have resumed after authorities failed to enforce an overnight curfew. On Monday, authorities declared a curfew in Baghdad as 2 people were killed and 112 injured by the 4th day of protests. Meanwhile, in Kerbala, south of Baghdad, at least 14 people were killed and 865 wounded overnight after security forces opened fire on demonstrators. Since the unrest started on October 1st, the death toll has climbed to at least 250. At least 2 people have died and several left injured after a 6.6 magnitude earthquake struck the southern Philippines. The shaking that lasted up to a minute rattled buildings and forced people to rush out of offices, schools and hospitals. Less than 2 weeks ago, a 6.4 magnitude quake killed at least 5 people and damaged dozens of buildings in the area. The chief executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, has dispelled reports that she will be dismissed from her post. Lam described the story published by a British tabloid as malicious and politically motivated.
The final question about speculative report on the Financial Times. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesman has already clarified that was very malicious sort and maybe politically driven speculation or rumor. As far as I'm concerned, from the beginning of this social unrest till now, the central government has been very supportive and remains confident that I myself, my political team, and the Hong Kong SAR government, particularly the police, will be able to handle the situation and end violence and return Hong Kong to normal as soon as possible.
Thousands of people gathered in Chicago to protest a visit by U.S. President Donald Trump. The U.S. President was in the city to give a speech at the International Association of Chiefs of Police conference. As many as 6,000 people gathered outside the Trump Hotel to show their displeasure with the president's first visit to Chicago since he took office.
You think he loves the Chicago Police Department? He doesn't. He never speaks out for any injustice that you talk about that go on in some areas of the police department.
I'm out here today with my group, Good Kids Mad City. We're an anti-gun violence youth-led organization, and a lot of us are specifically affected by the policies and the rules that Donald Trump has done since he's been in office. We're mostly black, a lot of us are queer, some of us are brown people, so to be in a city, to be in a town where Trump has not only notoriously have put Chicago in his mouth to spit out words of hate, to talk about us being this violent city, but for this to be his first time in his 4 years of office to actually come here, and not only just come here but talk to the police and not even talk to the citizens that he continuously talks so much stuff about is offensive.
Botswana's opposition Umbrella for Democratic Change, or UDC, has said it will launch a legal challenge against the outcome of last week's general elections. Results announced by the Electoral Commission gave a decisive victory to the ruling Botswana Democratic Party, or BDP, which has been in power since the country gained independence from Britain in 1966. UDC claims that the election was marred with widespread fraud and irregularities, which gave an advantage to the BDP. The BDP, however, denied any wrongdoing and accused the UDC of being sore losers. Leaders of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church have asked the government to deal with resurgent ethnic violence in the East African country. The call comes after more than 60 people were killed during protests last week. The demonstrations that started as anti-government protests spiraled into ethnic violence. 8 members of the Orthodox Church were killed when protesters attacked a cathedral in the east of the country.
Prime Minister Abiy's statement on Saturday night was very disappointing. It was very weak. He didn't mention the culprits and didn't show sympathy for the church either. It was a useless statement. Seeing the government act this way makes us sad.
Police in Morocco have arrested 7 people who are part of a group that was planning to carry out attacks in and around the city of Casablanca. According to authorities, the group planned to launch a series of attacks targeting sensitive infrastructure and strategic sites on land and at sea. Several weapons and bomb-making chemicals were seized from the suspects' hideout. An operation has been launched to arrest possible accomplices.
They were targeting the interior of Casablanca, and then the suspects would have withdraw points in the mountain areas in the north, which they had visited numerous times, near Chefern and Kwazan.
South Africa is commemorating Pride Month, a celebration that started 30 years ago in Johannesburg. Our correspondent, Matuba Malachi, profiles one of the organizers of the 1990 march.
Beverly Polisa Dietzi, with your courage and vision, you have fought against discrimination and championed human rights in your home, South Africa, and around the world.
It was a moment of pride for one of South Africa's bravest LGBTI activists. She is the first black African lesbian woman to address the United Nations on rights for the LGBTI community. This was her bid to get the United Nations to adopt resolutions recognizing sexual diversity, and for this she received an honorary degree from the Claremont Graduate University in the United States this year. Before that, she was instrumental in organizing South Africa's first Pride March in 1990. It was a success, and the country got its first taste of what unity in diversity could feel like. But it was all under difficult political climate. Nelson Mandela had just been released from prison. Political violence was at its peak, and the common goal for most activists at the time was ending apartheid. Bev Dittier documented the struggle for LGBTI rights in a documentary titled Simon and I. This is where she gives first-hand experience of the many struggles fought on top of being homosexual in apartheid South Africa. Her friend Simon Ngodi didn't live to see the fruits of his labor as an anti-apartheid activist and laying the foundation for the constitutional rights enjoyed by all in post-apartheid South Africa. In many of her interviews, Bev Dittier has expressed what it means to look back at those times.
And we'd walk up and down the streets of Soweto being as flamboyant as possible to create as much confusion as possible. Because the idea was to kind of, deconstruct gender. Even though now we have the words, right? Now the words are non-binary and genderqueer, and now we have all these different words that we're using. Then all we were was just other.
It's been 23 years since South Africa decriminalized homosexuality.
Almost 30 years since the first Pride March, the event now makes headlines on national television news, something that was unheard of in the early 1990s and before. And it's all thanks to the new constitution that was promulgated in 1996.
Walking down the streets of South Africa as an openly gay man is still being frowned upon, but the country's constitution remains the strength and shield for members of the LGBTI+ community. For Telesur, I'm Matuba Matlachi in Pretoria, South Africa.
That was our correspondent Matuba Malachi bringing us to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Doris Polo. Thank you for watching.